Poets, makers, speakers, censors, movers and groovers. Very welcome to the 2019 Oyster seminar on urban poetry. My name is Pernilla Glaser, and I work with conversations and contemplations in the interface between art and governance, learning and playing. About 20 years ago, the first Oyster seminar took place with the theme Rediscovering Urbanism. And maybe that's a suggestive undertitle to today's seminar. As the program states, this day asks if we are ready to examine how the poetic aspects of urbanity affect our lives and can give it a place in everyday practice. So can the smart city have a heart? Can the visible and the invisible trade place? Can citizens move and be emerged in unexpected ways? Can urban poetry carry meaning for justice, for health, for memory and belonging? Today we have speakers who will explore this topic from a multitude of perspectives. And we will have conversations running through the day exploring this. Poetry is a word that in itself contains both the making and the final piece. It grows some of its roots into the French poète, which is the singer and the poet, but also from the Greek poetes, which is the maker, the author, and the Proto-Indo-European word kvoivo or kwei, which is making, to pile up, to build up, or the Sanskrit sinoti, heaping or piling up. Before I introduce our first speaker, some practicalities. In case of an emergency, a fire, something like that, we run out there, or where you came from. If you know that you will stay for dinner and you don't have a drinking ticket, then you'll pick it up during lunch or coffee. Lunch is here, where we are, and downstairs, and the dinner is upstairs, but when we're done here, we would like to invite you to start that event downstairs. You have the program of the day on your card, which is for most of you around your neck, so you can always check there. And there you also have the Wi-Fi, which is Färgfabriken with just the password Färgfabriken. So where you are twice. I want to introduce the first speaker of today by first sharing a poem, because how can we have a day about poetry without some poetry? This poem is written by the man who got the Nobel Prize in 2011, the Swedish poet Thomas Tranströmer, about 20 years before he got the prize. And it's called Answers to Letters. In the bottom drawer of my desk, I come across a letter that first arrived 26 years ago. A letter in panic, and it's still breathing when it arrives the second time. A house has 5 windows. Through 4 of them, the day shines clear and still. The 5th faces a black sky, thunder, and storm. I stand at the 5th window, the letter. Sometimes an abyss opens between Tuesday and Wednesday, but 26 years may be passed in a moment. Time is not a straight line, it's more of a labyrinth. And if you press close to the wall at the right place, you can hear the hurrying steps and voices. You can hear yourself walking past there on the other side. Was the letter ever answered? I don't remember. It was long ago. The countless thresholds of the sea went on migrating. The heart went on leaping from second to second like the toad in the wet grass of an August night. The unanswered letters pile high up like cirrostratus clouds presaging bad weather. They make the sunbeams lusterless. One day I will answer. One day when I am dead and can at last concentrate, or at least so far away from here that I can find myself again. When I'm walking, newly arrived in the big city on 125th Street, in the wind on the street of dancing garbage, I, who love to stray off and vanish in the crowd, a capital T in the mass of endless text. A philosopher turned artist based in Germany but working in the world. Coming home to the rural and exploring the urban, making art in all kinds of places and spaces, mixing mythology and everyday practice. I want you to, with the biggest possible applaud that you can make, welcome Cornelia Conrad to the stage.
You should applaud later, after
no, they will.
You will ask me questions? Okay. I start with I didn't know. I put some works together to show a little bit my approach of working, and I have to tell you that some of the photos are a little bit too green, but she said before it's nice because outside it's so gray, so doesn't matter a little bit too green. Okay, now I have to open and okay. Technique is not my specialty. Okay. Some people call my work land art, but I prefer the word site-specific art, because actually there is a little bit cliché about land art, that it is just outside somewhere, something with branches. And I mean, I worked with branches, but I also work with other stuff, and for me, the place, it doesn't matter if it is in the city or in a rural place. A place, for me, is always a starting point for a lot of walking, for a lot of sending the different layers, the history, which is the architecture, the topography, everything I see around. And it doesn't matter if it is in the city or out of the city. This is always a thing which interests me. And the first work I show you was done in Brazil. And I don't know, with this cursor, you have to ignore it just. this work I want to introduce a little bit more detail because it was such a good conditions and I could really approach in the way I like. I was almost 2 months there. I came there without any idea. And I walked and on horseback and with a jeep, and I explored this territory. It is near a nature reserve. It's a private resort, and the owner there is very interested in art and also social projects and reforestation. And so also I worked with a team of people from the next village, and so it was very good, very beautiful project. And I was, as I said, I went around in this area, and I've seen that they have a very typical way of, the traditional way of building. It is called pot à pic. It's a kind of clay wall technique. Actually, you find this clay wall building practice almost all over the world, and the old small farmhouses in this region are made in this technique. And so I decided to work with this. Yes, and it's also important to know that the owner or the commissioner asked for a shelter, because it's a big territory. People are making, as I said, tours on horseback, and sometimes all of a sudden is a thunderstorm coming. And then they wanted to have a shelter, which is also a sculpture. And for this I was invited. And then I choose this place, which is on a hill. And I had this whole team of Brazilian workers from the next village, very good craftsmen, and I think they enjoyed also to work in this traditional technique, and I enjoyed to see their skills, and so it was a good collaboration. And there it's not like here, maybe you go, if you need a board, you go in a building market, there you go in the forest and you cut the tree and make the board. And so I was fascinated by their skills to do this. And and then we worked with cow dung, cow shit. I'm sorry, but it's like that. This is the way they made the clay. And everybody was looking forward for the clay day. And on the clay day came a big truck of cow shit, and we mixed it with earth and stamped it with the feet. And then everybody worked on the walls to cover it. And then in the end, the three ladies that come to visit, probably they smelled something. It was very pleasant. And this you will see later. It's a little bit a thing I like to do in my work is to dissolve things, to let things disappear. Or some people say also it comes together, or it flies away. I mean, I like this ambivalence between dissolving and coming together, concentrate, condensate, something like that. And I choose this place because it's a very beautiful view across the valley, and you see there in the back is a street going to the next village. And this is a work. Now it's a little bit more chronology. This is the last work I did before I came here, and it's in the mountain region in France. And there, the idea was, or the question was, what can I do with the old dry stone wall? Because it's a very old road which actually connects France and Spain. And along this road there are dry stone walls. And some parts are broken. And they wanted to rebuild, but with some artists' spirit. And so I came there and had the idea to. This was a very low budget project, so I had to use just the material which was there. And I found some old tiles, or they found it for me, a wooden frame, and I made this little house behind the wall somehow. Then this is another project in France. And there I worked in the pony stable. It's a castle at the Loire. I don't know if you know the Loire region. It's full of castles. And one of these castles is an art center. Very interesting. If you are in the region, you should visit. And this pony stable was a part of the castle before, and I chose it. I mean, how I choose a place, it's very difficult to describe. I try to walk as much as possible without intention, and let the images come. And there, I was thinking that these ponies who had a very beautiful life in these stables maybe sometimes dream of some breakout even. And so it brought me to the idea to make this rupture. But of course, it's a very protected historical, patrimonial place, and it is absolutely forbidden to break the tiles. So I had to invent a technique and a material to do this without touching the tiles, the floor tiles. And so it happened. Another work this was in the States, in the sculpture park. I want to ask you, if you have a question, you can just interrupt, or if I say something you don't understand, please don't hesitate. This is a very flat area and with a pine forest. And I found just a little ditch, which was a creek bed before, and I decided to build this breaking bridge. Why all this kind of breaking through, or this kind of breaking out or breaking apart is a part of my work? I don't know exactly, but I had a comment of a visitor some years ago. It was in Japan, and he said, "In your work is almost always a moment of humor and a moment of catastrophe." And I like this. I think he hit the point somehow. This is a permanent work. It's still there. It's a very interesting sculpture park if you are in the region. It's Montana. It's actually a rural part. You don't expect a sculpture park there, but it's a group of people, initiative from Chicago, and coming together there, and they found this place, and they started this park, and now it's quite known. So people, some 100,000 visitors per year. So it's interesting, and for this small town, of course, where it is, it's for some people who live there the first encounter with art, and it's interesting what it makes because I was speaking a lot with people there. And yeah, also France. I don't know why, but I had a lot of projects in France. Obviously, the French people like my work. I don't know. Me too, I like France, so no problem. This is a project in the old town of Cahors, near Toulouse. And this area was before a monastery garden, and now it is a public park. And I was invited to do there something. And then I found it interesting, these flower beds, and by coincidence, the city gardeners who I was working with, they had spare parts of this kind of, how to say, closure around the flower bed. So I could work with this. I thought about making extending this line of flower beds by another one, which look almost similar, but has something crazy also. So I built this, and I planted it with medical plants. A little bit a reminder to the monastery garden, which was a medical garden also with herbs and stuff. And it's still there, and the city gardeners care for it, I hope. I mean. This was summer. I mean, I like in my work, actually, I'm not so much doing that kind of monumental stuff which are in the middle of the place or something. I like to be a little bit in the corner somehow. You can easily overlook it, but if you go with open eyes, you see it. And for me, when I'm working, because I build these things at the place, sometimes I spend 2 weeks every day working there, and then normally people pass by, and there is a moment then people start like, and then I think, okay, I'm on the right way, because because yeah, I like to do something which is visible from the corner of the eye, which doesn't jump into the attention somehow. Because, because actually I like irritation. The moment of irritation for me is a very important thing in my work. Because normally when we walk, we are in a kind of inner monologue, and I like to interrupt this monologue for a moment. So you come to a presence somehow. And this is for me a very important goal. This is a work not in a very beautiful natural setting. It's a former industrial hall, and now there is an art collection there in Switzerland. And they asked me to do something in a kind of corridor. And I was walking around this building, and I saw there's a lot of small gardens and the garden sheds, little garden huts. And they told me these gardens now they are subject of they will disappear soon because there's new plannings for new buildings, so they will erase all these small gardens. And then I thought I make a memorial for these little garden shelters, because they are kind of makeshift. I mean, it's people doing sometimes a little bit scrap material. Sometimes it's better, well done. And I asked for a real garden shed, garden house. And then they brought me this one, in parts, of course, and I rebuilt it. And it's kind of breaking out. And then there is a light inside. Obviously, somebody is still living. Don't know. This was a very, well done garden shed. Very good constructed. So it was not so easy to to rearrange and construct it. Put the pieces together. Anyway, this is also at the Loire, in the same place where I made this rupture in the floor. This some years ago. I made this door in the forest area. It's actually the border. It's the beginning of a little forest trail. And yes, and then this place gave me the idea of a passage, like you enter in another space. This can be understood in a different way, to enter in another space. It can be really from the meadow to the forest, or in a mental way, in another space. So how are we in the time? Okay. Okay. Yeah, also in France again, this time a botanical garden, Domaine du Rayol. It's at the Mediterranean Sea near Toulon. And it's a very, very beautiful botanical garden which is created by a famous paysagist, or how to say, landscape architect, Gilles Clément. Maybe some of you have heard this name. And Gilles Clément, I met him. He's also a philosopher. He has the idea not to do like in a lot of botanical gardens. You find this separated areas for plants, and so then he likes if the plants intermingle. He always he said to me, the wilderness is what he is interested in. Not only the culture, also the nature should grow, should have a place. And it was for me a very beautiful experience to work there, because the gardeners of these botanical gardens, for me, they were all artists. They were not only cutting plants which were too expansive. They tried to give shape to things, and so yeah, it was a pleasure to work there. And I found this bended cork oak on a small clearing. And I was also walking outside of this botanical garden in the mountains behind, and there I found very often abandoned small houses of the shepherds. And I learned that there are not so much shepherds anymore. It is going down, this business, and I like to kind of, often in my work I make a kind of memorial to something which is threatened or which is it's about to fade away, like an old traditional technique or something to remind to the life of ordinary people there. And and this gave me the idea to make this little closure, a dry stone closure. It's not really a dry stone. I have to admit that there's some cement also because it should be permanent and people should be able to climb on it. Of course, not on this part in the middle. And then I found it so amazing to see a tree like this, which is bended. You can see it like a kind of dance, which is stopped for a moment. A dance which maybe lasts since 100 years. And to show this power of this tree, I made this breakthrough. It's again the industrial hall in Switzerland where I did several works. It's an art collector. This one is inside, as you see, and this was before there was the halls for the factory. It was a factory before, and you see in this building at several places this kind of pillars, as you see on the right side. And you say pillars? I don't know, the thing to hold up the ceiling. And I decided to make a similar pillar. It's the same structure, it's the same size, but mine is a little bit catastrophic. So, and it is at a place where normally it could be a pillar like this. Where the ceiling makes a cross. It's just a little bit over the floor. So then there were visitors in this art collection, and I've seen from far there was somebody who's trying to. I like that. This is as you see, South Africa. It was a biennale of land art, and artists were invited. We had only 1 week to see the place, to find the material, and to build something. And it was a very, very short time. Actually, I prefer to have a little bit more time, and I was getting a little bit desperate after 3 days of walking. And then suddenly I came to this place, and it is a kind of laguna. There's a river coming out and the ocean on the other side. And on the other side of this river mouth, you see a peninsula. And I had this idea of bridging this river. And I looked around, and there was a lot of driftwood. And so it was perfect. And then I had people from from the next township working with me, and that was a very beautiful collaboration also. They helped me collecting the driftwood. But I had to promise that after the exhibition they can take it apart again and use the driftwood for their houses. And of course that's okay. And yeah, and then it's a little bit also the kind of dissolving thing. What I often have in my work, or you can imagine that it goes into the earth. I mean, the idea for this bridge came when I was walking on the beach. There was a lot of walkways and bridges people make to enter to the beach. And so I like to quote sometimes this kind of things I see around. And it was like that. And then something very mysterious happened when after I finished it. There was an old man coming who lived there since a long time, and he said, you know, once this laguna was created by a big hurricane. Before, the river mouth was smaller, and there was a wooden bridge, which was broken then. And this is, yeah, sometimes, I don't know, strange can happen. I think can happen to everybody, just to be present, to be, maybe then arrives this kind of memory, because I think that places have a memory. And sometimes I catch a little bit something of it. A work on facade of a paper mill. Yeah, it was a paper mill before, and somehow I had the idea to make this stone facade kind of breaking, and like paper or like a skin, giving space for another facade which comes out, which is a little bit absurd because the facade behind is modern, and why it's like this, you have to think yourself. And and this was how it looked before. I added the whole thing with the window and everything in front of this existing window there. Yeah, another one in Switzerland. And there it was, it's a Biennale, as you see, very well known in Switzerland, this Biennale of Sculpture in Bad Ragaz. And I was working on the golf course. Was a bit dangerous sometimes. And there was these 2 apple trees, and I decided for this place because, I wanted to do also this kind of houses which are also disappearing. There, it's an old barn, and I got really the wood of an old barn which was broken down in the next village. So I received this wood, and I wanted to make the apple tree kind of growing out of this house. And they also organized some old roof tiles. I like very much to use recycled materials. not only because it's ecological, but also because I like if my work looks like as if it has been there all the time or since a long time. And so it is kind of merging into the place, and this is for me an interesting effect. Yeah, and it makes also a part of this irritation, because you can pass and you think, what is this? Has it been there yesterday? I don't remember. So that's something I like, if people react like this. Yeah, and then the friend was there in autumn and sent me this picture I like. Yeah, this is in California at the university, a project they have every second year to invite an artist to work with the students. And there was this building which is partly on kind of stilts. Just at this wall, there was no stilts. And I thought, why? I mean, then I decided to make the same kind of stilts, the same measurements and so, with this little thing they're sitting on. And yeah, a little bit strange. And it was also fun to do it because I was working with the students, and there was a lot of exchange, and yeah, it's a beautiful project too. This Artists on Campus, it's called. You see, sometimes I don't use so ecological material. But this was from a recycling place, so my conscience is better. Yeah, I try to reuse things, or I go to recycling places to find materials, so I think it's okay. Yeah, another very different project was in Germany, in the east, near the former DDR border, and it was the 25th anniversary. No, I cannot see, of the Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe. How you say annual? Anniversary? What? Anniversary? Okay. And there was an exhibition in a closed in a building there, and they asked me to do an installation outside of this building about this subject of the Chernobyl catastrophe. And I was researching a little bit, and I found that after the nuclear accident, they erased about 60 villages around Chernobyl. And I wanted to remind to these villages and the people who lived there, who lost their houses. And so I decided to work in this little forest and do these windows, which are a little bit like gravestones also, but with some small decorations inside, using old curtains and all this. So it's a little bit like maybe the lost homes which were demolished. At least that was my idea. Yeah, there was. It was an art competition. I was lucky because they chose my proposition. In Ireland, in this time, they had this 1% percentage for art for new built road, and I don't know if it exists anymore. But I've seen that a lot of buildings around this place were abandoned, farms and family houses, because Ireland was economically going down very much. And in the same time, they have these historical ruins they like to open for the tourism, and so I combined this both thing, like it's actually like a modern house, but it is a ruin as well, and dissolving or in a state of decay somehow. Or some people say it comes together. I like this in between also. It's a subject you find a lot in my work, even. And it's still there. I received news, sometimes photos of people passing, still in good shape. Yeah, this is contemporary. It was for an exhibition. And it is one of these houses. I built a whole series. Actually, I thought I can offer this to a real estate agency. Because, yeah, but each one is a little bit different, and always I quote things I see around. And there it is on the round point. How you say round point here? And on the other side is a new settlement, and the houses of this new settlement resemble very much to this one, in the color and the size and so on. And it even has a TV. Yeah, it's a little bit a joke, of course. And if somebody is offended of the real settlement, it's not my problem. But I didn't receive any complaints yet. There was even a Dutch family coming, and they asked if they can rent it for a holiday. But it was a joke, of course. Yeah, this was in Germany. On a hillside also, kind of overlooking to a river, overlooking a river, the Danube, Donau. And it was, in former time it was a vineyard, and now it is a leisure park, for a public park. And you see this kind of benches frequently. And I used one of the benches which were there. And but the place I choose, I put this bench in front of this bended tree, because somehow it fits, I think. then the organizers found this tree which was cutted, which had this perfect shape of a fork. And so everything worked very well. The only thing which didn't work was the rubber. I had to strengthen it with steel rope because it was too heavy in this distance, 13 meters long. But in this kind of work you find ways to improvise. Then, yeah, people like very much to sit there. And I have a whole series of people sitting on this bench. Some of them never came back, I don't know. Oh, then I have to be a little bit faster. This is in Japan, as you see, in an art center created by Tadao Ando. Maybe some of you know, it's a very, very famous Japanese architect. And I was invited there for almost 2 months, a little bit more even. And I worked inside in the gallery. And I decided to make because I was visiting also Aomori, this is the next town, and there's some fishermen's villages around. And I quoted these simple houses of the fishermen in the next village. And I said it a little bit, how to say, in a dialogue with Tadao Ando's big gestures. And it's also a little bit, because the vegetation there is a lot of this kind of plants like bamboo, which is built a little bit in this way. And this is another work I did there, also in Aomori Art Center. Under there's an underpass of this art center. Upstairs in up there there's the workshops. And I mean, Tadao Ando is great. He makes beautiful buildings. I admire very much. But I wanted to quote a little bit the houses of the normal people who are in Aomori. And some of these features of these houses, the colors, the size, is a quotation of the village houses I've seen in Aomori. Yeah, this is, my God, the time is going. It is more than, no, the time of this, I mean, it's, it is 11 years ago. It seems like yesterday. A special forest in Australia, on the west coast. And also there I like to work with used, weathered wood, because a lot of the houses of the people there is built like that. I mean, and then this forest was there's carry trees. It's called. It's big, huge, high trees, very straight, like rulers. Just one was leaning a little bit, and so I decided to make this house like as if it is kind of keeping it up, the tree, or the tree is pushing the house down, something between. This is sloping field in France near Country Road, and there's also some life going on still, and I make a kind of with a timer, some changing illuminations. And then there was the question that the artists come back 2 times and to make a seasonal transformation. And then this was in spring. And they had a satellite thing and everything. And this was in November. Yeah. Now it's a work in France, in the mountains, in the area of Grenoble, in the Alps. Also there I found this place. I was very free to do whatever I want. They gave me the whole valley. They said, do what you want. And I said, okay. I was walking and I found these 2 big, huge rocks. And I built this wall between. Another Australia work. Do I have time for this? Okay, this was also a very strange story because it was a little bit experimental project, artists on farmland. We collaborated with the farmers and the farmers helped, and I had a little 3-wheel drive. I was driving around. It's a huge area. And I always returned. I had another thing in my mind, but I returned to this dry riverbed, and there was this dead tree, eucalyptus tree, and somehow I saw this arrow going through, and then I decided to build it with the help of the farmers. It was was an adventure to get up there. Anyway, what is strange about this is that after this, somebody told me that there was really in the time where there was still a river there, it happened to be a massacre against Aboriginal people at this place, and that was, I don't want to mystify it, but it is strange because I didn't know before this. And it's again what I sometimes experience, that places have memory. People forget, but places keep the memory sometimes. How it is like this, I don't know. So we are almost at the end. There's only one more I did in France, at the entrance of a forest. It's a former time was a forest, hunting forest for aristocrat people. Now it's a public park, and I found this kind of remains of 2 gate posts, and I rebuilt them in this way. Yeah, that's it.
I told you they would. So, Cornelia, I just want to ask you a little bit about about thousands of things, but we will take a few. But I think we should change place, so we have you a little bit more visible for everyone. You do a lot of reading of the place, and you also a lot of reading of the place. You sort of, as you said, you walk and try to just be there and see what happens. But you also engage a lot, also very practically, with the people who are there, who help you make things. And I would love for you to share a little bit, just go into the details a little bit about, because when you present like this, you say, yeah, you know, the people from the neighboring village built this with me, or the farmers built this with me. But how is that happening from sort of when you arrive? How do these dialogues and these collaborations build up?
Well, first it is, of course, a collaboration with the organizer or somebody who invites me, who knows the area.
Sort of mediator.
Yeah, and then, for example, in Brazil, the guy, he knows the people of the next village who can help me building. And he even hired somebody, a young man, to make the translation because I don't speak Portuguese. And so, yeah, it came together like this. It's, of course, a little bit more complex, but it's also each time a little bit different how it is organized.
But what is your sort of, I mean, for example, if we take the last example here with the farmers here, how is the dialogue around also the art piece come into place? Do you also talk about, in those collaborations, do you also talk about the art piece?
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
And how does
I mean, it's often in the beginning, because very often people, they were not so much in touch with art, like this farmer, for example. But they were open because they allowed artists, because they were asked before, of course, if they are okay that artists come to their farm.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, he was just curious what it will be.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we started this dialogue, and actually it was him who told me this story, which happened before his time. Yeah. And he was a little bit frightened first of my idea, and I didn't know why. And then after a while he told me this story. He didn't like himself. He was a bit hesitating. But the story about the massacre against Aborigines. And like this, I mean, I could tell a lot of stories like this of each work. I mean,
and because is there also, have you also met really resistance when you sort of have done this sort of interruptances? Yeah.
Yeah, it happens. Sometimes people don't like it, or they don't understand what I'm doing there. No. I mean, for example, this work, the two gate posts, is a public park. There's a lot of people coming by, jogging and so. And then somebody asked me if I'm restoration, if I do restoration. And
sort of.
Sort of, I said, yeah. And he was a little bit, found it very strange that there's not a French person hired for the restoration of this gate. I said, sorry, but it's like that. And then after a while he came by every day and he saw the thing growing, and then, he seemed to like it. I mean, he brought me some sweets. And
so things happen also because you spend a lot of time there.
That's a very interesting part of the process, is to spend this time at the place in every kind of weather with all kind of people, and not only the people who are art educated. No. I have I'm in touch with all kind of people. And so
I just want to ask you a final question before I let you off stage, and it sort of has to do with time in a way. Mm-hmm. When we spoke before this event, you were talking a little bit about this sort of love paths, this path that happens when people are just starting to walk across a field, and sort of how this can happen, and how you also look for these marks in a place where people have started to do something unexpected. Can you say a little bit how that happens for you, how you sort of look for this things that just emerge, because I'm curious about that, because you also have sometimes it's about permanence in your art, but sometimes it's also about the opposite. Feel free, take it apart and take it home when you want. So how do you think around these levels?
Think about the permanence?
Yes. How things can happen and then disappear, and how you sort of look for that when you are in a place. How do you look for this sort of signs of what's
okay,
up.
yeah. Well, I mean, the process is I need a lot of spare time.
Yeah.
I need my camera, my sketchbook, and nothing else. And I just walk. And then I think nothing can replace walking by feet, because it's kind of making a map, I think, with the feet by walking. And so I meander.
Yeah.
I follow some, I don't know, in Australia, for example, I followed the ants into a small forest and this kind of thing. And sometimes it's a light situation or axis of view or something which attracts me, and I go
So you're also playing with the space, in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, I mean, if I manage to get really rid of some preconcepts, which of course sometimes are in my head, if I manage to get rid of that, it starts a dialogue with the landscape, and then I find things like some remains or some traces or whatever.
And then you start to...
yeah, and then it comes together.
Yeah.
And it's perfect, like in South Africa on the beaches, when I look around and there's the material. Of course, it's not always like that. But
it happens.
It happens.
Thank you so much for following
the
lead to this place.
Thank you. Yeah.
My mother said, from the division of cells, from a genetic material, from your father's head, but not from me. My father said, from the clash of civilizations, from a fundamental antagonism, from my tired head, but not from her. My father said, if it were possible to compete in martyrdom, your mother would do everything to lose. My mother said, the heart is not like the knee that can be bent at will. My father said, even the rooster who does not crow gets to see the sun rise. My mother said, but if the hen does not lay an egg, she will be served for dinner. My father said, your brother shaved before his beard started to grow. Your brother saw the terrorist's face in the mirror and wanted a flat iron for Christmas. My brother said, someday I want to die in a country where people can pronounce my name. My brother said, do not think it is in your power to offer me anything. My father said, whose father are you rendering? My mother said, whose mother are you rendering? My brother said, whose brother is being referred to? My grandmother said, if you don't finish chopping the vegetables soon, there won't be any dinner. This is from the Swedish poet Athena Farrokhzad's piece, White Blight. A writer exploring how poetry moves, how people moves, and how poetry and justice can come together. Our next speaker is the director of the Division of Policy and Governance for Health and Well-being, the World Health Organization, based in Denmark. This division's work is to implement the European health policy, Health 2020. It's a health policy that spans questions about governance, health, social justice. And he has worked many times around the globe in the interfaces of all these difficult questions. And you know what to do. So please welcome Agis Tsoros. Yeah, keep it up. It's the narrative of the century, after all. No, speak some more so we can see, make sure that we hear you.
Yes.
Yes.
Brilliant. Good morning. And there is, Pernilla, there is a verse you missed from that poem you read from just now. And the verse you missed, it reads, "And my friends said, 'Where are you going, Agis? You are invited to a conference which has as its title, Poetry and Oysters.' Are you sure?" So I needed to prepare my mind, so I thought I have to be on the safe side and no surprises. So as I'm coming straight from Kuwait, where I was working the last week, then I thought, well, this meeting is about, apparently, is about oysters. Well, you see, the culture of Kuwait is based on pearl fishing. And they use these beautiful boats, which are called dhows or booms, and they go across the Persian Gulf looking for oysters. So I want to leave it to you to continue your search for beautiful oysters. Now, something else. I'm probably the only doctor here. If anybody needs help, I'm here. I want to share with you something which is a great regret in my life, which is that for many years now, we have all come to realize that a lot of the issues we deal with to make a better world, they are not issues that relate to one discipline. They are issues that concern most of us. And yet, we continue, although we keep preaching that we shouldn't, we continue to work in silos. We continue to work in our disciplines. We continue not to talk to each other and mingle with each other and share ideas with each other. And it's very strange, because if you look into the literature, this idea of interdisciplinary, intersectoral, goes back years. But we don't do it. Yes, I speak very often in conferences all over the world, but most of the time they are my peers. And it's like talking to the converted. We keep congratulating each other for what we say, but the world doesn't change like that. By the end of the day, we know, as I will be talking to you about health, that health is everybody's business. In fact, I can tell you for sure that architects and urban planners can make a contribution to health which is unimaginably strong. But here I am, talking to an audience of architects and landscape specialists, and this is a rare opportunity. So I want you to bear this in mind, because we have a tendency, if someone talks about health, immediately you think about hospitals and nurses and primary care centers and so on. And yet, what we know, as I will show you, and I will give you the big picture of where we are. I just don't want to talk to you about my discipline's concerns, but I want to share with you what are those issues where you could be prime actors, and yet these are issues that they are not widely shared. So let me first start with a poem. It's a visual poem, and I want it, again, to fit the spirit of the conference. And I want to share with you a story. By coincidence, Cornelia is also starting with Brazil, as you did. And I was some years in Rio, and a friend of mine, he was a public health person, he took me to visit a favela. If you know this term, the favelas are the slums in Brazil, and in Rio they are an amazing kind of feature of that city, of that urban space, because you have in the same place an alteration of wealthy and slummy areas. So I was walking around with my friend, and at one point we come to a place. There was an absolutely dreadful road with sewage running along, and there was this absolutely decrepit house, and in the window of that house there was an old lady. And what I did is I had my camera and I lifted the camera, think of this in slow motion, because I wanted to take a picture of what I saw. But I felt guilty. I thought, who am I to take a picture of someone else's misery? It didn't feel right to do this. So as I was doing this, and in this motion, my mind goes fast to see, should I do it or not? Then something magic happens. This lady does this to me. Wait. She went inside, and she came back with a bird on her finger. And then she said to me, now take the picture. And of course, I sent her the picture when I went back. But that told me something. In her world, in her narrative, in her context, that was a precious moment. We connected for that brief second. And that, I felt, was something to remember, that in our work, above all, you as architects and planners, myself as doctor, and everybody else, we really talk about people. It's all about people. And it's all about people in a world today that, I'm afraid, is not the world of our dreams. Because there are beautiful examples of human ingenuity and innovation, but we keep forgetting, as we go and we walk in the streets of this world, that there are many worlds, and in those other worlds, there is a lot of inequality, a lot of deprivation, a lot to wish for. So I will also give you, as an introduction, the example of a BBC journalist who, in a panorama presentation, it's a regular program, he did something very simple, but so effective. This is Sheffield in England. He stood on one of the hills of Sheffield, and he said, the children that are going to be born in that part of the city are going to live longer, they are going to go to good schools, they are going to live in environments which are healthy and inspiring. The services provided in those neighborhoods are of high quality. They will have good education, good social support, great opportunities for employment, they stand a very good chance to have a fulfilling life. But the children that are going to be born in that part of the city, they're going to live 12 years less. Their environment is not clean, is not appropriate for children and families to enjoy life. The services are of low quality. They are not going to be, most of the time, employed, and their lives are not the lives anybody should dream to have. It's a very simple thing to just tell you that it's something we live here and now in our cities. And don't fool yourselves that this picture that I described to you, it's something that applies to some developing place. This is Sheffield, is UK. In London, there are differences between different areas of the order of about 12 or even 15 years of life in the same place, between neighborhoods, people living there and there. So what is going on here? Now, many people have thought about this idea of health in different ways. So I want to tell you, to share with you briefly how health is created, what are the concepts that we use in the 21st century, cities and health, and the Healthy Cities movement that I've been part of for many years, the challenges that we are facing, the idea of networking, above all, the idea of places, health and well-being, the concept of healthy places or of place making. Leadership and governance. You know, we talk a lot, there are many ideas, and we keep saying that we have the ideas, we know what it takes, but change doesn't happen. Why? For what reason? What it is that a leader should know and do to be part of that process of change and innovation. Why today we talk about diplomacy, not only diplomacy in the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, but also diplomacy from the citizen level up to the highest level. And what it is the future that we want to shape, and what are some of the prerequisites for that, the critical issues. Because health is a precondition, outcome, an indicator of a sustainable society. So don't be only proud with the economic and industrial output of your country. If this is not matched by indicators that show that you are a healthy society and you are an equal society. Health is today on the global agenda for all sorts of reasons: security, economic, social justice, as a way for diplomacy. I will not go into that. But the way I will navigate many of the ideas I will tell you, is there a pointer here? There must be, yes. I want to just give you, like a canvas, a sense of what are the issues that we talk about today. Always we start from people. Always to remember, by the way, and that's why I put it in yellow, you know, 150 years ago, urban planning and health were very closely connected. Urban planners and public health people worked very closely together. And this is how many of the problems of the cities of the end of the 1800s were solved. For some reason, the two disciplines were into different ways in the course of the 20th century. And this is now the opportunity to be able to reconnect. So here, I want to explain what is the meaning of a healthy city, why it is important to talk about cities for all, to explain that health is connected with the idea of physical, social, mental well-being, we talk about happiness, we talk about healing, talk about fulfillment. We have a society, and our cities, of course, primarily, with a constantly changing social landscape. Go and visit the countries of East Asia. Do you know what is their issue number one? Aging of the population. And aging of the population, we're talking about staggering percentages, 25, 30%, and going more and more. How do you adapt your urban environments to meet the expectations, the needs, the aspirations for good life of older people, of an aging society? We talk today about age-friendly cities. But we also talk about child-friendly cities. How we adapt our urban environments, our neighborhoods, to support a healthy and happy development. So we talk about urban planning design for health and well-being. But one issue that we often forget is that this is not happening in a vacuum. Especially in today's world, we have to remember that. We need values. We need value-based planning. We need value-based development. Values like the right to health, the right to education, the right to live in an environment which is clean and supportive, the right to sustainability, the right to equity, and to universal access to whatever is good. And I say and emphasize that because this is the premise of a world that needs to be looked after in a way that addresses the needs of all. I said the social landscape in Europe. Think of migration. Our cities are not the way they were before. You have so many different ethnic groups today living in the cities. What do we do to address their needs, their expectations? You know, a doctor in the past, if I'm to limit this to medical care, would have a list of 2,000 patients who would be more or less uniform. Today, their clientele, it's much, much diverse. And what do you do? How do you prepare to address? How do you understand their needs and expectations? So there are all those issues, because this is a diverse world, develop different urban narratives, and of course, it is very important to always remember, as I said before, that we have to not only have the good ideas, but also think how we can make the change. You know, Piero della Francesca in Renaissance period, he painted La città ideale, the ideal city, which is far from what we may think of cities with people and buzzing. This is my città ideale. I come from a Greek island. It's called Syros, and this is where I was born, and this is where I have my best memories and experiences. But when WHO 30 years ago launched the idea of a healthy city, many people thought that this was going to be about a city with good hospitals and clinics. No. And the reason for that is that we know very well today that the big influences on our health are not the health services, mainly. They are actually the physical, social environment within which we live and our ways of living. The vast percentage of what is responsible for our health, it's not the hospitals and the health sector. It's everything else where we live. So here we described the menu or the attributes of what is a healthy city. Of course, what you expect to see, clean, safe, high quality. But as you see, it is everything. And it is all about people and sustainable development and diversity and participation. A key word, empowerment, participation, listening to and engaging with the community. And today, remember that many of the issues that we have to have in our minds as priority in the world are also very relevant locally. Peace, sustainable development, poverty, inequalities, migration and refugees, climate change, the aging of the population, the non-communicable diseases. Maybe this is a term you don't understand. Chronic diseases. Do you know what is the epidemic in our world today? It's chronic diseases like cancer and like heart disease and pulmonary disease. Is it too, let's say, medical for you? Well, remember one thing. All those diseases have to do with our lifestyles. Do you know that in Europe we have one of the worst records of obesity amongst our children? Again, you may say, well, you probably need a good doctor and a good dietitian. That doesn't work like that. Some people think that tackling the problem of obesity amongst children is a matter of going to the medical establishment. What is the answer? Better food, right? And more exercise. But if you don't have an environment where active living is easy, is an easy choice, it will not happen. The answer to obesity, whether it is in children or older people, is not to build more gyms. It's to make the city good for all ages, to promote active living, walkability, cyclability, accessibility, feeling safe. I'm an older person. Architectural barriers. There are so many things you can do as builders and creators of neighborhoods to make active living easier. To be able to cycle to work, it's a wonderful option you have in Copenhagen, where I lived for many years. But it is not a safe option to cycle in Athens, the capital of my country, because you will be killed. It's not good enough to have a bicycle. You need a whole environment, a new culture. And you know, sometimes people tell me, oh, you know, in Denmark, Scandinavia, you know, how can you do those things? You know, they come to Copenhagen or to Sweden and they look at the cycling lanes and they think that God, on the seventh day, created Copenhagen with cycling lanes. This is not the case. I tell them it took, what did it take? It took vision and political courage and determination to fight, to anticipate, to look ahead, and to create a solution that it is good for many aspects, because a cycling lane is good for health, it's good for energy, it's good for the environment, it's good for the traffic, it's win, 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 win. But you have to have a vision. And you need to have the evidence. And I want to tell you something. Once in one of my conferences where we were talking about cycling and urban planning, I invited also a professor from California. And I said to him, I didn't check his PowerPoint. I should have done it. So he went on the stage And he started, oh, well, I'm not quite sure that the evidence is strong enough that the cycling lanes go sort of are closely correlated with physical activity. I wanted to turn off the mic and get him off the stage, because this is, I say, if you don't cycle in Copenhagen, you will never cycle in your life, because you have it on a plate and because it's easy. Eventually, science will prove all this. But what I'm trying to say is sometimes we are interlocked in this. Is the scientific evidence strong enough to prove that we have to invest? It's not like that. We have to have evidence-informed policies. Because I will tell you the reverse. When 30 years ago we started, the goal number one was equity. But 30 years ago, equity was not supported by strong enough evidence. So people were saying, oh, well, you're all a bunch of socialists in the World Health Organization, and you're trying to promote these ideas without enough science. Today, 25, 30 years on, we are drowning in evidence. But you know something? Change is still not happening. And this is a lesson learned. Evidence alone, no matter how strong it is, it will not make the change unless we think about governance and leadership, unless we think of the way we should be able to change the world, unless we think of the way to join forces with different disciplines to make that happen. So, this is something that we do a lot, to think about people and healthy living in all ages, creating livable and active cities and neighborhoods, and the idea of social support. So, the priorities for us, for a healthy city, as you will see, it's always equity, sustainability. Are you familiar here with the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, how lucky we are, because it's for the first time that the whole world is committed to a common agenda. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals give you the legitimacy to unite forces and to act on the most important issues that burden our societies today. The Sustainable Development Goals, it's the UN agenda for 2030. It's not something only for developing countries. It's for the whole world. But if you look inside each one of them, because again, we make the mistake and we look and we say, okay, I'm an architect, where am I here? And probably you will think that you are part of Sustainable Development Goal number 11, which is about cities. The truth is, you will find a piece of what we are trying to do in every goal. Sustainable Development Goals is a commitment of your government at all levels to make changes in those areas which were very difficult before to tackle. And that's how I urge you to also use them as a frame for action in also the urban planning and development field. Now, I don't want to go into many details because there isn't enough time. Look at this graph. I think it's beautiful. It just shows to you what I said before, that only 20% of the impact on our health comes from the health services. You see? Everything else comes from other sectors. Socioeconomic factors, education, family, income, community, physical environment, our behaviors. So who are the responsible for health? Well, the reality is that everybody is responsible for health in your own fields. And I'm very happy about one thing. When we started the Healthy Cities program in Europe, now it's a global movement, and we invited a city to send a representative, invariably they will send a cardiologist. They would send a clinician. Do you know what is the beauty today? That very often, more than often, cities send a planner. The responsibility for healthy city programs in many cities of Europe are not in health departments. They are in planning departments. And this shift is happening because they realize that within planning, there are the connections and there are the expertise to make the differences in all those areas that, of course, the doctors and the health system do not have access to. Another myth. I will not go into the details, and this should go even much longer before. You know, we have oversold this idea of effective modern medical care. The truth is that the mortality, not only about children, which is here, but adults and so on, over many decades, has started already in the 1800s. And it's going down. And this was mainly because of the improvement in the living conditions. I'm not saying that vaccines and medicine does not have an important role, but I'm saying the bigger influences come from that. Now, very quickly to mention some of the concepts that in my world we deal with, but those concepts are also very relevant to you. First of all, there is an evolution of our understanding of health. So today, in 21st century public health, we talk about the determinants of health. We talk about the social determinants of health. We talk about the economic, the environment, the commercial determinants of health. You may say, what is this guy talking about? Well, think of something. Think of children's obesity, okay? Our children are fat. What do you do about this? Well, you think that you have to deal only at the family and individual basis. If our children are surrounded by sugary drinks, who is responsible for that? What I mean is the commercial determinants of health is the realization that there are big commercial interests that feed all of us with unhealthy food. Someone needs to take action at the highest level by taxing, by forcing to reduce salt and sugar in our food. Do you know that you go to supermarket to buy a slice of ham in the packet? I urge you all to read the ingredients. There is always sugar in there. It's one thing to eat a chocolate when you want to have a sweet, but it's another thing to be fed with sugar in foodstuff that is not supposed to have sugar. So, commercial interest. This is how we fought tobacco and the tobacco industry. Someone needs to be able, the labeling of foods, the content of foods, the availability of foods in canteens, everywhere. I'm working these days, I was in Kuwait last week. Obesity amongst children. Do you know what's the level? 75%. 75% of children are overweight or obese. Physical activity, very little. They are eating all the time, but eating all the time. I'm working in the Ministry of Health, and every 15 minutes there is someone with a tray who brings sweets and sandwiches, etc. I say, stop. You know, If you are taking 3,500 calories every day, you will inevitably become obese, whether you are a child or an adult. All these things have to do with the environments within which we live. But you need someone to have the political will to make those changes. So we talk today about the kind of society we want. You remember what I said to you before. And I want to spell it out, because for me it's the one thing that I do every time I go to visit a place. I go to a place and always they take me to see the best things. And I say, Mr. Mayor, I would like to see the best and the worst of your city. So in one of the countries that I'm working at the moment, I will not name it, I was taken to 1, 2, 3 projects, fantastic urban developments, amazing services and structures. So I said, look, I would like to go and visit some of the less developed districts in your mega city. Oh, Dr. Chouros, it's dangerous to go there. I said, look guys, I'm not going to go in the middle of the night. I'm going to go during the day, but I need to see with my own eyes. Nobody would take, they would change subject. So because they always give me someone to help me with the driving, so when I finished my work, I said to the driver, Ronnie, we are off. I found out which was one of the worst areas. And we went there. It was like being in another world. I'm saying I was shocked. I knew they would be living conditions that were not similar to those in the fancy neighborhoods, but I tell you, I was shocked. The streets, the garbage, the state of the buildings, looking around, it was like being in a totally deprived area, in a deprived place of the world, not in a developed country. And I was in a developed country. So I took pictures. I went back the following day. I said, you know, you were there? Yes, I was there. And I showed them the pictures. And I said, look, I wouldn't be dignified and honest with my own professional work if I didn't tell you this. This is public health. Don't tell me what you do in areas of your city where there are more millionaires per square kilometer than in many other parts. I want you to do something there. So this idea of cities for all, and the narrative is up there, what sort of society do you want? That's where you start from. 10 minutes. So this is, in many ways, something to guide our thinking. So there are many concepts that we incorporate in what we do. I spoke to you about the social determinants of health. It's a Swede, Dahlgren, who did first this beautiful graph of the various impacts on our health. And this is the equivalent of Dahlgren, but showing the determinants of health within an urban context. So I don't want to show you, I'm testing your reading capacity. Now, we say in my work, but this applies everywhere, that health is a political choice. Because of the determinants of health that cover the activities of so many sectors, it depends on your values that are explicitly, so do you want to address inequalities? And also on your courage to address the real issues that impact on people's health. I'm a doctor, and a patient comes and says, I have bronchitis. The old-fashioned way is to give him antibiotics and send him back home. But where did I send him? I sent him back to a dump home, which was the primary reason for getting his pneumonia. These are determinants of health. Do you want to treat the symptom and send back people to their social and physical context, which is totally unhealthy? Who is going to do that? So just be ready, because it's going to be a rapid sequence. I will only stop in 1 or 2 slides because Pernilla wants me to stop. So this is a nice graphical representation of the idea of the difference between equality and equity. Don't kid yourselves that just because something is available, that it will be used by people. People in different socioeconomic backgrounds need extra support to enjoy the fruits of what you are offering. This is being true to the concept of equity and inequalities. So there are beautiful maps showing inequalities in every city. This is from London. This is the Sustainable Development Goals. The issue of governance, modern governance, and today modern governance. This is another aspect in everything we do, is people, communities. And you know, because you are also experts and we are experts, remember something. If you want to work with communities, you have to forget this patronizing top-down approach. We are the experts, we know best. If you want to work with your community at a neighborhood level to do something better, you have to sit with them and you have to be prepared to get ideas which are not your ideas. You may talk about cardiovascular disease, but they talk about nuisance of environment and noise and safety, and you have to compromise. So I have written this book, which is available for free also online, City Leadership for Health and Sustainable Development. Wait. I need to go somewhere which is very important. The concept of health literacy, which is how not just give people information. Many people think that, we have now our mobile phones and everybody can get messages about health. No, people need skills to be able to use this information, to be able to navigate what is so difficult in this information world, to understand what is available for them, what is good, what is bad. So this is another part. In WHO, we worked for about 15 years with urban planners. We have developed guidelines. We have developed a lot of examples. Again, you can find all these publications, especially the blue one, Healthy Urban Planning, Planning for People. And we have developed a series of attributes of what is healthy urban planning. Now, this is a survey which addressed people's concerns. They are the ones that you would expect people. But this is a slide that I want you to see. The 12 healthy urban planning objectives: to promote and support the lifestyles, social cohesion, access to good quality housing, employment, accessibility to various facilities, encouraging local and food production, safety and sense of security, equity and the development of social capital, attractive environments, good water quality, conservation and quality of land, and reducing emissions. Now, I spoke to you about the Copenhagen building of the cycling lanes. These are a series of messages, and I would like to ask Pernilla and the organizers to make this slide this PowerPoint available to all of you, so you can look through and you see there is a lot of detail that you can, I'm sure you will find it very relevant, and very relevant especially for urban planners, of what we mean and the kind of recommendations we give to our cities. Don't worry about that. It's just to test your ability to photograph what you see. Now, this is the agenda of the Healthy Cities movement in Europe. Even from the colors, you will recognize that we respect the Sustainable Development Agenda, and this is how we have engaged also with architects to develop the concept of healthy places and what it entails. So this is this is the graph from the work of NHS and the chief architect in Scotland that we use a lot. This is the idea of the attributes of a healthy place. You will see it's about transport, it's about the influence and control, feeling safe, facilities and amenities, play and recreation, the natural space, and so on. It's a very in and fashionable concept today. And I'm happy to say this also brings us, the health people, with the planners much more closely together. Again, the whole idea of place is spelled out in the following slides, which I urge you not to try to read. So as I said before, it matters the values that we want to uphold, to be inspired and apply courageous leadership. We do know what sort of governance we need to use to work across sectors to be able to implement these good ideas. I spoke about experts versus people, not as an antagonistic situation, but the need to connect and understand where each is coming from. Creativity and stimulation, the benefits of urban planning, strategic thinking, and the narratives for the future. So this is in detail. That's why UNICEF have created also a movement called the Child-Friendly Cities. We have also the Age-Friendly Cities, and so on. This is the concept of the Age-Friendly Cities, or planning for green cities. So, in conclusion, those who really win today, the day, are those who invest in partnerships, dialogue, consensus, integration, and of course, empowering and energizing the community. In a time when unhealthy and unsustainable conditions are being built into the physical fabric of cities, a new awareness and strategy is urgently needed to put in health and well-being at the heart of planning. This is the big issue. It has become a symbol. It's a simple, but it tells so much. It's a metaphor of people's health when they have the ability with simple means, if the environment is appropriate, to do something for their health and well-being, because of course health is wealth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agis. Thank you for your discipline. Thank you for your discipline and your talk. So some of these questions we can come back to also in the concluding discussion that we have today, where there will also be space for you guys to ask questions. So if you have things that you think about during the lectures, please keep them, write them down or remember them so you can bring them back up. But I would like to ask you about poetry. before we go to lunch. Because you talked about the oysters, but I want to talk a little bit about the poetry, because when we spoke before this meeting, we talked about, I asked you a little bit about what kind of conditions change the narrative of a place and the people that live there. What happens when we start to move from one narrative to another? And I want to hear your thoughts a little on poetry and how you understand the role of that in what you are speaking about.
There is a Greek poet called Kavafi. I don't know if you're familiar, but he's one of the most loved poets in Greece. Oh dear, I forgot to put the poem up there. And Kavafi has written a poem about city. It's called The City. I'm not going to read all of it, but I want to just read a verse to you.
Please.
And in this one, he says, "You won't find a new country, won't find another shore. This city will always pursue you. You will walk the same streets, grow old in the same neighborhoods, turn gray in these same houses. You will always end up in this city. Don't hope for things elsewhere. There is no ship for you. There is no road. Now that you have wasted your life here in this small corner, you've destroyed it everywhere in the world." And a commentator about this particular poem says, "The city that the poet cannot escape is his albatross, his beast in the jungle, his secret sharer, his heritage, his sexuality, his cross to bear, his heaven. But the city is Alexandria too, and Alexandria, Kavafi was from Alexandria, that won't go away, but won't let go of him either. It haunts him everywhere. There is no undoing the life he's lived there, just as there is no land to turn over a new leaf in. The city that may never have been his home and which he can't wait to leave behind as he yearns for his true Ithaca remains his own and only home." And in reading this, I wanted to just explain, also by visiting the places that I travel to, that there is a narrative that can be destructive. There is a narrative that determines the way we think. I've been many times in Belfast during the years of the conflict. It's a narrative of feeling unsafe, of conflict, where children grew up there. And that was their context. And this context, you know, all of us, we don't need to be experts in psychology, how our early years defined our perceptions of the world. And this idea that you grow up in the wrong narrative, in a narrative that traps you, you can't escape from, when we know that there is an alternative. And of course, we have to respect the diversity and the beauty of our world, because people see their ideas and dreams fulfilled in so diverse contexts. But you know something? When I think of a city the way I described it before, that city that I didn't tell you which it was, with such different narratives for the people.
It's polarization.
And those who are being brought up in this deprivation, in this misery, that's not the narrative for not only it's not the right narrative, but you are also aware that there is somewhere else something which is far better than what you have. And somehow, by reason of fate, you're trapped in that one. So the short answer to this also is that for all of us, as we are trying to change and to change mentalities, is to just remember this, that we have to urge our leaders to look at the big picture, to really understand the needs that make people happier in the full sense of the word.
But I have to intersect with
Yes.
sort of add on, because you have also experienced what you emphasized as vital, which is to sit down with the people, to also take the small steps together on the ground level. And you've also experienced narratives change. So the war is over, so how do we sort of start to tell another story about our city that makes us less trapped or gets us out of that cage? And what have you seen as the most important steps when you have seen these processes in the change, in changing the story? What can you just give an example or two? These have been key.
It's always
things.
two pillars, I think. One is inspired leadership that comprehends these issues, and also the other pillar is community. And when I say community, is like in healthy urban planning. Have you consulted with people? Have you spoken with the people whose neighborhood you are about to build? Have you offered opportunities for them to have a voice? I mean, it's not a big bang that happens. But when you feel that someone is prepared to listen to you and to listen to your immediate concerns, then we are the interface. I'm not a mayor, I'm not community, but I'm someone whose responsibility is to bring the evidence in a way which is understood and say, look, don't demand all these hospitals here. We need something else. We need wellness centers, as they are very common in the Asian countries. We need parks. We need to be able to walk to the near shop. We need to feel safe, and so on.
Yeah.
So we need all these ideas to be shared in an interdisciplinary way, because the first step for us when we worked with urban planners was that they said, but for us health is not in our vocabulary.
So you had to be an interface there too.
Yeah, we'd say, well, but we all care for people.
Yeah.
And I know you do a lot of work that can influence healing. You know, many of the things that we see in urban landscaping has something to do with the mind and the way you can. Yeah. So it is an interaction. And, you know, the last word, Pernilla, I feel so inspired listening to you, going to meetings of colleagues who do not work in my domain. And say, oh, wow, these are great ideas to bring where I work, and vice versa. We need a dialogue, we need to listen to our people, and we need leaders who are prepared to be courageous, to make the moves which will have the strongest impact on health and well-being.
Thank you, Agis.
Thank you.